Hi everyone, welcome to today's lecture of Ancient Philosophers Part 2. My name is Jonathan Chen and I'll be your speaker today. Do you know what it's like to be back in the ancient Greek or Roman civilizations? Well, I don't too. But what this lecture will aim to promote is to put you inside these ancient civilizations' shoes so that you can understand the way they thought and then how they nuanced their daily lives. Today we're going to be covering our last two ancient philosophers, Epicurus and Marcus Aurelius. You've obviously probably heard of these names probably because they're really influential inside modern culture or literature, but today we're going to be covering more towards their philosophical works and then trying to analyze the way they thought and then their trends. Freaking hell. Willie, why are you texting me right now? Let's get started. First, on the belief of Epicurus, also known as Epicureanism. It's a really complex and intricate belief full of many foundational values. The first is the belief of life particles. Philosophers do not really fit the definition that we give them nowadays in the sense that it's just nerdy guys who think all day. But instead, in the past, philosophy meant the love for wisdom, which means that philosophers or thinkers would go beyond the worlds of literature but also focus on ideas such as biology or human anatomy. Which is why here, this idea of soul particles is a philosophy brought by Epicurus where he believed that the human body is composed of multiple life particles spread all around us, or known as soul particles, and the only reason why we feel sensation of happy or pain or physical pleasure is because of these particles' existence. Building upon this idea that our body is composed of intricate soul particles that give us pain or happiness, what Epicurus believed was that the moment that we die, these particles do not exist anymore. And that's really important because to the point where our particles do not exist, we do not exist. And this is really crucial because the idea that we're not going to exist shows that there's not going to be an afterlife, which means that we should not worry about our consequences in the afterlife. It is also because the center of our body and our life should be towards maximizing and really going towards our body's sensations. Epicurus' whole ideology of how we should live life is that we should maximize pleasure and minimize pain. You can sort of see this hedonistic, also known as YOLO views brought by Epicurus into how we should live our life. But let's go a step further in how he uses this ideology to categorize different human desires. Epicurus categorized human desires into three key categories. The first category was this idea that it's natural and also necessary desires. So this would be things such as food, water, and accessories that we need in our life. The second category would be natural yet unnecessary desires. This would be luxuries such as perfume, fancy clothes, really expensive food, and last but not least came the empty desires, which was unnecessary and unnatural. This can include things such as human wanting to be immortal or getting a 5.0 GPA. At this point, you can sort of see the way Epicurus' philosophy formulates. He advocates for this idea that we don't need to worry about what happens after death, which is why we should live in a realistic way that we maximize our physical pleasure and minimize our physical pain. This also tells you that Epicurus took a much more conservative stance towards philosophy and how the way the human life should be lived, because he advocated that we should live in a realistic manner and just try to be as happy as possible materially. Now, let's play a game. I know philosophy can be boring, but then let's play a game of Who Are the Epicurus. What comes next is going to be a list of celebrities or TV show characters, and then we're going to try to guess whether they're Epicurus or not. First up, we got Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You'll have 10 seconds to guess whether Jake is an Epicurus or not. So Jake's definitely an interesting character because from his role as a police officer, we can see consistently that he has really strict moral codes. But fundamentally, I would still argue that Jake is an Epicurus because from his multiple instances, we have seen that he is willing to maximize his physical sensations, but more importantly, Jake would party like there's no tomorrow.
Do it! I believe in you. Throw it! I believe in you!
Next up, we got Dennis Rodman, 5 times NBA champion and the ultimate rebounder for the Chicago Bulls. You'll have 10 seconds to guess whether Dennis Rodman is an Epicurus or not. Now, Dennis Rodman is an extremely interesting example because he's probably one of the most controversial figures inside not just the sports world but modern America. This man could be winning NBA championships one day and then partying with Kim Jong-un on the other. Now, I would guess that most of you are gonna say Dennis Rodman is an Epicurus because of his hedonistic worldviews. However, I would still want to say that Dennis Rodman is not really an Epicurus because while it is true that he is willing to live like there is no tomorrow, what's fundamentally differentiating from Dennis Rodman and an Epicurus is that Dennis Rodman is not gonna be strapped down by some societal norms. He's willing to party with one of the most dangerous and stigmatized men on earth. Is that really an Epicurus? He does not stick to his necessary and natural desires. Now, moving on, I hope you enjoyed that game. We have Marcus Aurelius. He was crowned one of the last great Roman emperors, and you probably know him from his book Meditations. It's a required book in a lot of English courses. But let's focus on his ideology today, and that's Stoicism. While you all may not be that familiar with the term, Stoicism is actually much more embedded in our daily lives through this whole rise and grind culture, especially in teenage populations, so it's really much more common than we think it is. One of the core and root values of Stoicism comes from relating back to nature. This can mean multiple things. Either it can mean being appreciative of our environment, or it can be just simply comparing your insignificance to the entire universe. Like, you're really just one tiny little dust, and to be honest, no one would really care about you in like 1 or 2 million years, or even just thousands of years. But this is really, really important because through this reflection into nature and our environment, what Marcus Aurelius and other Stoics argued is that we need to be humbling and reflecting on ourselves because we really aren't that important. Now, similar to this whole idea of adapting to the environment, Marcus Aurelius also advocated for this ideal of harmony. Now, this isn't a type of harmony where it's like, oh, hey, I love my friends love me type of harmony, but instead it's a harmony and an inner peace within oneself. Now, a way we can look at this is through one of my favorite quotes from his book, Meditations. Inside the book, he writes, "People try to get away from it all, the country, to the beach, to the mountains. You always wish that you could too, which is idiotic. You could get away from it anytime you like. Inside." This is a really, really interesting quote because people who love traveling would always be like, oh, hey, I feel a different sensation when I'm in a really fancy hotel or when I'm in a really, really beautiful place. But what Marcus Aurelius advocated for is that if a person is really happy with themselves and happy with the environment and the people around them, no matter where they are, they're always going to feel this type of peace and they're always going to be happy. Now, reflect this to the role Marcus Aurelius took. Marcus Aurelius was pretty much one of the most busy men on earth at the time. He was running one of the largest empires we would ever know, which was the Roman Empire. It's really astonishing to see how one of the most busy men still had the time to make sure that he himself was good mentally, and we can really see that from these quotes. He always took care of himself because he took his worldviews and his mentality wherever he went. But also, this idea of having harmony and tranquility within oneself is really, really life-changing because it's not only a way that you can gain inner peace and become a much more patient person, but instead, by changing yourself, you're also changing the way that you view the world around you and your perception of the world, which can really, really change your life because past things where you think are really annoying and it really bothers you, when you switch your mindset and take a much more optimistic and humbling view, you would realize that, hey, it really isn't that important at all, right? But also, there are 3 key fundamental values here: nature, harmony, tranquility, and being accepting. You can eventually see that all 3 of these foundational values are all corely rooted into one philosophy. So, let's say that a Stoic got an F on a test. Instead of complaining and whining around, what the Stoic would do is they're gonna recognize the fact that this test score isn't really that important, but then they're still gonna force themselves to get better because that's the only way they can gain much more harmony or tranquility within themselves, which is why Stoicism is not only a great way to make sure you're well mentally, but more importantly, it's a good way for you to reflect upon yourself and then make decisions rationally. Personally, I would say that Marcus Aurelius has been one of the most inspiring or influential persons in my life because through reading his whole writing and meditations, you really start to expand upon your worldview. Past things where you think are really important are not really that important, but every time you face hardship, instead of blaming other people, blaming yourself, or just simply complaining, you take a step back and then you really humble down yourself and then you think, what are the only things I can do now? And only when you think rationally can you ever make the best out of a tough situation. Now, you're probably making the connection of Stoicism to all these motivational channels, the sports world, and all of those things. It's true that it's probably one of the most celebrated ideologies, even though we don't really know, in modern society, but there are definitely still some drawbacks to Stoicism. Now, this definitely took me some time to figure out because I probably have shown a bias towards the fact that I believe Stoicism is a helpful ideology, but you need to realize that through this whole idea of thinking rationally, one, not being able to complain, like obviously complaining is stigmatized and it usually is not the best option, but what Stoicism suppresses is the idea of humans need to express their emotions. And we can see through this from Marcus Aurelius himself. You need to realize that Meditations, which is the foundation of Stoicism and later thinking that was inspired by it, was basically Marcus Aurelius's diary. This was what he came back to every day after fighting. He would go back into his tent and then write the meditation. But the diary, like all diaries we have today, was not intended for people to look at, which is why Marcus Aurelius probably complained about a lot of people inside his day, but he never showed the people that he was complaining to them. He would just go back and write in his diary. And this is really important, is that because he always suppressed his emotions physically, that he had to bottle up all of his emotions and then put it on this book. So overall, I would say that the core values of Stoicism of humbling yourself, reflecting, and then thinking rationally are all great ideologies, but at the end of the day, you still need to take a balance or a measure as to how much or how healthy do you need to be in order to express certain emotions. Now, I've been throwing around multiple times that Stoicism is really related to our modern society, and you're probably thinking about it right now, but it's really beyond like all those gym bro motivational quotes we see on like TikTok or social media. And let me give you a few examples. One of the most obvious connections that I made is this idea of Mamba mentality brought by a famous basketball player known as Kobe Bryant. We're not here today to discuss the character of Kobe Bryant because he's done some pretty horrible things in the past, but if you purely look at his idea of Mamba mentality, this idea of working quietly, not complaining, and suppressing your emotions, and just grinding towards what you want, which is to become the greatest, it's all really adhering to the idea of what Marcus Aurelius talked about, and this is the perfect example for Stoicism. Now, as we conclude today's lecture, let's just take a few minutes to talk about what we covered. First, we got Epicurus, this person who believed that we were composed of soul particles, and because we don't have an afterlife, we don't need to worry about what's going to happen in our life, and we should just focus on maximizing our physical sensations. And on the other hand, we have Marcus Aurelius, this great man, just saying, don't complain to other people, work hard just by yourself. These are really conflicting emotions and conflicting ideologies, but I would say that there are good parts that you need to take from both philosophies. From Epicurus, it's the idea that you need to be happy and then you need to satisfy yourself materially. This means often going out for some good food or watching a nice Netflix shows that you like. And on the other hand, from Stoicism, you can see the good idea is this core value of reflecting yourself. Understanding how insignificant you are, so then when something unfortunate happens to you, you're not going to be complaining, and instead you're going to take a rational approach. But then again, like I said before, this idea of Stoicism is also slightly toxic towards your feelings. So philosophy is good, but you need to take a good balance and then apply it to the situation to see what you really want. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. This is the end of Ancient Philosophies. We're going to come back next with much more interesting videos. Thank you.